Welcome, welcome. It is the Mitch I Am YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please click subscribe. Give the video and videos some sort of interaction. You can like it, dislike it, whatever you want to do. Leave a comment, but please click subscribe. It's a lot of NFL talk, a lot of NBA talk, primarily focusing on the Knicks, the Green Bay Packers, and today the focus is on the Green Bay Packers. Training camp wrapped up, preseason done. Now you shift your focus to the final 53-man roster for Green Bay. There's certainly some looming questions on the back end of that 53, but when you zoom in on a couple of positions, specifically question marks for Green Bay that are still present after the third and final preseason game against Baltimore, and that is, what do you do at backup quarterback? What do you do with the starting kicker spot? Again, please subscribe, Mitch I Am, to the YouTube channel. Let's start with QB2. QB1, obviously, Jordan Love. Hardly played in the preseason. I'm fine with that. Threw a dot against Cleveland in the preseason opener to Dontavian Wicks. What was it, like a 65-yard touchdown, something like that? I was fine with Jordan Love not playing hardly at all in the preseason. It put a spotlight on the backup quarterback position, Sean Clifford, second year out of Penn State. Michael Pratt, seventh-round pick, rookie out of Tulane. Duking it out for that QB2 spot behind Love. I do think there's a common misconception or idea with the backup quarterback spot. You know, just talking to some of my buddies, whether it was this offseason, past seasons, I think too many people live under the mindset of, when they look at the backup quarterback position, they live under the mindset of, if our quarterback goes down, do we have a good enough backup that can carry us through the postseason? That we won't really skip a beat, and it's just not realistic. The Nick Foles run with Philadelphia a few years ago was an outlier. It was not common practice when Nick Foles rolled through the NFC, steamrolled the Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship game in Philadelphia, and then went to Minneapolis for the Super Bowl and won a shootout against the New England Patriots and Tom Brady. That was an outlier. That was not something that you can, unravel as a blueprint if you're one of 32 teams every year and say, man, we need to go do what Philly did when they got Nick Foles. It's just not common to see that. It is, in fact, the exact opposite. Look at Joe Flacco last year with the Browns. Had a great run with Cleveland, filling in regular season. They go to the playoffs. I think he had 2 pick sixes in the wild card round loss to Houston. Even entering the postseason, I don't think many people were like, man, Joe Flacco, this feels like Cleveland could go all the way. It was, hey, they got a really good defense. There's pieces on offense. Chubb was, of course, out from basically the get-go right away in the regular season. But you had Amari Cooper and Njoku had a good year at tight end. It's a good offensive line in Cleveland, but not many people were like, man, Joe Flacco-led Browns teams, they're going to do it. And that is the more realistic expectation. Not that, your backup quarterback's going to get you to the playoffs and then throw 2 pick sixes, but that even if you get to the playoffs with a backup, you're still climbing uphill and heavily uphill and trying to just tread water at some points. To me, when I think of the backup quarterback spot, I like to phrase it as, if our guy goes down in season and he's going to miss anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, do we have a backup that can keep things afloat? Not a backup that we put everything on his shoulders and say, hey, go get the job done for us week in and week out until we get QB1 back, but a guy who can look around and say, hey, you know what? In Green Bay, we got good wide receivers. We know we got 4 real solid ones. We have a good offensive line. We've got an energized, fired-up defense under first-year defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. And so the pieces are in place for Green Bay where if, something did happen to Jordan Love and he missed a couple of games, a lot of backup quarterbacks could step in and see some sort of success. But you still have to find that guy. You still have to nail that home if you're the Packers. And so that's how I think of the backup quarterback position is, if our guy goes down, can our backup come in for 2 to 4 weeks, keep things afloat? And just get the job done. Doesn't have to do what QB1 does, but can keep things afloat. Because if you're living in the backup quarterback can still carry a sort of land, you're always going to be disappointed. So now zoom in on the Packers. Look at their situation. Sean Clifford, Michael Pratt. I think the question you have to ask is, can either, at this stage, the phrase I just used, keep things afloat if something happened to Jordan Love and sidelined him for a few weeks during the regular season. Clifford, too much chaos for me. Remember watching Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M? It was constant chaos. At times, it seemed like organized chaos. He'd run around. He'd be facing the wrong way, running around sometimes, doing a 360, throwing it up to Mike Evans, throwing it up to his other weapons. And for Johnny Manziel at A&M in college, it always seemed to work out. He'd extend plays. You'd think, where is this going? This has no chance. And then, boom, 30-yard dot down the field. Someone's open. When I watch Sean Clifford, there is some of that Manziel chaos. And I'm not saying, I'm not comparing him to Johnny Manziel. I'm comparing him to the chaos where there are so many plays with Sean Clifford, this preseason especially, where it's like, where is this going? Oh, my gosh, I don't know. And then you're fearing the worst, an interception, and then it's usually chaos anyways. But the results aren't the same that Johnny Manziel saw at Texas A&M because this is the NFL. This isn't college. You get the chaos, you don't get the fun results. And I've seen too much of that from Sean Clifford. He's in his second year. Hasn't shown, at least in my eyes, enough drastic improvement this summer with training camp in the preseason for me to look at him and say, yes, this guy can fill in a pinch if something happens to Jordan Love and he misses a couple of games. I don't see that with Sean Clifford, and he's in his second season. Pratt, he's a project. He's got the strong arm. And I thought he was cruising along in that game against Baltimore, and then he threw that horrendous pick in the red zone, and you're like, oh, no. But it's a rookie. It's a seventh-round pick. It's a rookie. He's a project. You see, at least I do, some untapped potential with Michael Pratt. But again, that's your backup quarterback can't really be a project. You want someone cemented in again, especially if you're Green Bay. This isn't a Green Bay team that's in a rebuild, and you're like, you know what? We don't really have to emphasize the backup quarterback spot. Every team wants to believe they have a chance when week one rolls around every September. Realistically, a lot of teams know probably not going to be our year. We're in a rebuild. Look at the Las Vegas Raiders. They're not in a rebuild necessarily. You think the Raiders are looking around like, man, we really need the backup quarterback spot? And, of course, they have O'Connell and Minshew, but I'm using their roster as an example. Like, the Raiders weren't looking around like, we really got to cement something home in case option A goes out at quarterback. Probably not going to be a great year for the Raiders, most think at least, right? And they had to figure out who their starting quarterback was. Different discussion for a different day. I look at Pratt as a fun rookie project that if you want to keep 3 QBs, keep Pratt. If you want to try to hide him on your practice squad and don't want to reserve a 53-man roster spot for him, I'm cool with that too. You roll the dice a little bit that someone could pluck him from the practice squad, and then put him on their active roster. But if you want to try to keep 3, I would suggest, then it makes sense to keep Michael Pratt if you go that route with the 53-man roster. But I don't think right now Pratt's a guy that you can plug in and feel real confident about, again, for a 2-3 game stretch if something happens to your starter. So where does that leave Green Bay? I guess you see if any quarterbacks that they would prefer get released, or you can peruse around free agency. There's names like Blaine Gabbert, Ryan Tannehill. I mean, it's tough pickings right now, right? We're less than 2 weeks away from week 1, from Packers Eagles Friday night in Brazil. And so there's not, you wouldn't think, some golden ticket idea just sitting out there at backup quarterback. I would say the more likely option for Green Bay, if they have that, is a surprise release by some team. And I don't know where that comes from or who that quarterback may be. But that, to me, would be the more realistic route, because you look at free agency. Again, I think your top 2 options would be Tannehill, Blaine Gabbert. If you want a veteran that you can plug in a pinch. If it were me, Dolphins released Mike White too. I saw that. But if it were me, I'd either roll the dice and keep Pratt, or it just doesn't seem like the Green Bay way to, at this stage, go out and sign a veteran quarterback to back up Jordan Love. It just doesn't seem like something they would typically do. But if you're that front office, if you're Brian Gutekunst, if you're the head coach, Matt LaFleur, are you overly encouraged with either option, Clifford or Pratt, right now, to be the backup week 1 when you go to Brazil? And I don't think they can say yes to that. So we'll see what they do. I thought Pratt was cruising along. It was one play. It was a bad interception, though. but it kind of brought things back full circle, and you're like, yeah, he is. He's still a project. He's still one that you're going to have to sort of slowly bring along. And, I mean, he was a 7th-round pick, and so that kind of goes with the nature of the beast. Typically, if you make a roster when you're chosen in that round, rare are the instances where you choose someone in the 7th round and it's like, oh my gosh, we got a day one starter. I mean, it just doesn't happen in the National Football League. Mitch IM, YouTube, please click subscribe. A lot of NFL talk, NBA, New York Knicks, Green Bay Packers. Packers are the focus today. Let's transition to the kicker position. Another kind of head scratcher for Green Bay. Before we get to kicker, and I should have prefaced with this before we started the quarterback talk, keep in mind what Matt LaFleur said after the game Saturday against Baltimore, because I think that's very, very key within all of this. He was asked about the kicker spot first, and if I'm paraphrasing, but I believe he was asked, do you feel like you have the kicker situation figured out? Do you feel like you got that guy, like in this building after training camp now done, preseason done? And Matt LaFleur said, we've got a really good sample size, and we'll see what happens around the league. Now, a lot of times I think there's coach speak that goes on where the coach is going to give the answer you expect and you can't put much stock into it. Matt LaFleur, if he felt really confident about one of these guys, Greg Joseph, Alex Hale, not really vying for the spot, but if he felt really good about Greg Joseph or Anders Carlson, he could have at least said, yeah, we feel like, you wouldn't expect him to come out right after the final preseason game and be like, Anders Carlson's our kicker, Greg Joseph's our kicker. You wouldn't expect that, but he could have leaned towards the side or the angle of choosing his words in a way where he said, we feel like we've got that guy in the building. We feel like we know what direction we're going. Instead, he said, we've got a really good sample size. We'll see what happens around the league. Not a ringing endorsement for Carlson or Greg Joseph. Later in the presser, he was asked about the backup quarterback spot, and he said, we'll see. And I quote, we'll see. Again, I think it's similar to the kicking competition. There was some really good moments, and then there's some things that we absolutely have to do better. We'll evaluate everything that's out there for us. That last sentence, talking about the backup quarterback spot, is the one that I sort of circled, highlighted, and I said, Again, he's choosing his words very carefully, very strategically. We'll evaluate everything that's out there for us. Sounds like a team that might maybe dip their toes in the water to see if there's a quarterback to their liking to be the backup that is released by another team. But again, not a ringing endorsement for Clifford or Michael Pratt. And you can't blame LaFleur for that. He can't sugarcoat things. He can't coddle these guys when they're struggling. It's a business. It's the National Football League. And the players understand it as well. At least most of them do, and all of them should. And the truth is, like with the kicker spot, Anders Carlson appeared to have it wrapped up, and then he bricked a 32-yarder in the fourth quarter against Baltimore. Greg Joseph hasn't separated anywhere close to enough to suggest he should take the spot from Anders. You have to remember Greg Joseph was the competition brought in. Like in the UFC when there's a championship fight, it's like, hey, who's ever got the belt when you walk into the octagon, they need to be clearly beat. If it's a dance for 5 rounds in 25 minutes, the champion's going to retain the belt. And I looked at this kicking competition, and I thought, at least to myself, and I could be wrong, but I kind of took it as like, if Greg Joseph is to win this job, he's going to have to clearly win this gig. Like, if it's even or it's a close race, I would see Green Bay just deferring and leaning towards Anders and bringing him back for his second season over going to Greg Joseph, the veteran who's bounced around a little bit and was last with Minnesota. And Greg Joseph did not do that. He did not separate from Anders Carlson throughout the summer. He came in, you're a little bit behind the 8 ball. You would really have to outperform Carlson in training camp in the preseason to take the gig, and he just didn't do that. Camp totals, per the Pack-A-Day podcast, Anders Carlson, 81%, Greg Joseph, 78%. Both leaving a lot on the table. Both leaving, to me, a lot to be desired in that department. The problem with Anders Carlson, for me, is the unpredictability of the misses. If he were nails from 45 yards and in, and then a little shaky from 45 plus, I think you can bite the bullet and you can live with it, and you say, let's just hope he figures it out. Mechanically, they get things right with special teams coordinator Rich Bisaccia, who's a gem, who's highly regarded throughout the league, as the guy for a special teams coordinator. And so you would hope, man, if Anders was automatic 45 yards and in, and then 45 plus was a little more shaky, and that's where the misses were sort of peppered in. I think if you're Green Bay, you live with that entering the second season. The problem with Anders Carlson is that's not what's going on. He missed a 32-yarder against Baltimore on Saturday. Green Bay was up 4 in the NFC divisional round against San Francisco, fourth quarter, halfway through last year, and he missed a 41-yard field goal. Would have put Green Bay up by a touchdown. Instead, San Francisco gets great field position. It's 21-17. They go down, they score. They win 24-21. Green Bay season's over. Not putting that loss on Anders Carlson, merely pointing out it was a 41-yarder in the NFL. I know it's a big moment. It's a big spot. It's the playoffs, nationally televised, standalone game. You got to make the kick. He didn't do it. He missed 5 extra points last year. It is a roller coaster ride with Anders Carlson. That is the problem. If you had consistency in some area, it'd be easier to say, let's just go with Anders Carlson. But the misses are here, there, and everywhere. And they come in the extra point department, too. I mentioned he missed 5 last year. Having said that, I still think it's either Anders Carlson or outside hire. I think that's the way you have to go if you're Green Bay. Alex Hale is the long-term project on the international player pathway spot. I do lean towards still give it because he's only in his second year. I think about his brother's spot, and I know they're brothers, but it's 2 separate situations. But if you remember Daniel Carlson, rookie for the Vikings, he had the shakes. He was not good in the clutch. He had a miserable rookie season in the Vikings after 1 year. Head coach Mike Zimmer said, no, we're not doing this. And they got rid of Daniel Carlson, and he went to the Raiders, and he's been an all-pro caliber kicker ever since. And so you would hope that Anders Carlson turns around. The big difference, if you look at Daniel Carlson in college, he was pretty good. I don't want to say automatic, but Daniel Carlson was really, really good in college, and then his rookie year just fell flat, but he figured it out, picked it back up with the Raiders. Anders Carlson has the struggles he's had in Green Bay dating back to his Auburn days, and so you start to wonder, like, is this just who he is as a kicker? And again, despite all of it, I would lean towards just giving Anders one last shot to figure it out. I could be chewing these words up and spitting them out 2 months from now, but at this very moment, as Green Bay now shifts their focus to the final 53 in week 1 against Philadelphia and Brazil, I would say give Anders Carlson one more shot. Let it be known, you don't want to put too much pressure on him, but it's a short leash. It's going to be a short leash because the preseason games are done. Now it's the real games, and things get even more dicey, and everything gets even more condensed. It always does. And again, I mentioned the backup quarterback spot, and I said I just don't think there's some golden ticket option out there. I don't think there is for kicker either. A lot of teams carry 2 kickers in the preseason, and so maybe you like one of the guys that gets the axe from another team, but they're getting the axe from another team for a reason, right? Because that team believes they have a better option. And so it's tough. So with kicker, I do say I'm leaning towards give Anders one last shot, but let it be known. And if it adds more pressure to him, so be it. It is a short leash. You can't ride this wave out through his second year if he's going through struggles when you're Green Bay and you're setting your goals pretty high. Or if you're not internally, at least externally with the fan base, the goals are set pretty high. So that's where Green Bay's at. Backup quarterback, I don't know what they're going to do. If it were me, I'd find maybe a veteran. I don't trust Clifford or Pratt right now to be the cemented in backup. If you want to keep 3, I would keep Pratt. Kicker, go with Anders unless someone else that maybe gets released blows you away. Again, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, interact. Appreciate it as always. Mitch I am on YouTube. We'll see you next time.